privacy. And I'm very honored and glad to be welcoming Simon Rogers and both the audiences here in person, but also online to this very special event. Before I introduce you properly, Simon, just a quick note to the audience. So following the conversation, there will be a chance for you to put questions in the Q&A online. And for those of you in the room, there will also be an opportunity. I will announce when the Q&A will start. So yes, Simon Rogers, it's great to have you here. Simon is Google's data editor. Beforehand, he was Twitter's very first data editor. And he's also the author of not only the book we'll be discussing today, but also author of Facts or Sacred, which is based on The Guardian's data blog, which you co-launched. And together with his team at Google, consisting of data journalists, analysts, visualizers, he's generating insights and sharing stories with Google's data. So I'm very much looking forward to be discussing your new book, What We Ask Google. And please welcome with me, Simon Rogers. So Simon, I will ask maybe a very difficult but also broad question. But yet you're talking about this massive data set here in this book and come up with such interesting and varied insights. If there's one key message for you from this book you want your reader to take, what is that?
Wow. Firstly, thank you for coming out on this incredibly warm night to possibly the warmest place in London. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I would say if any of you feel ever that everybody else has everything sorted and knows everything and you don't know anything, then this book is for you, because basically none of us know anything. We need help with everything from how to boil an egg or how to tie a tie. So I'd say basically that thing of us all kind of struggling to understand the world is definitely a theme. And the other stuff I would say is really it's about how often there is a crisis of loneliness out there, as we know, and people often feel kind of alone. But you would be surprised to know how often other people are doing the same things that you're doing, even at the same times. And then also, and we can talk a bit more about this, but a lot of search is about trying to help people, trying to help others, and which is not. I didn't go into writing the book expecting that, but it's what really shines through in the data.
Okay, could you elaborate a bit on that?
So when I started thinking about doing this book because I worked with Google Trends data for like 11 years now, and a lot of I've not seen people look at the way that everybody searches for the everyday stuff, like parenting, pets, grief, family, that sort of thing. And my mum had died a couple of months before I started writing it, and I thought I'm going to write the grief chapter first because it'll be the hardest one. And so I started work on that one. And if any of you who joined this particular club, it's pretty miserable, and you feel very alone, and you also feel like you're the only person in that situation. Objectively, you're not, but you do feel that. And what I saw in the data was that other people were searching for the same things that I was searching for. And I also saw that people were searching for how to help people in my situation. So it really resonated with me that there's this kind of, whether or not we feel part of a community in the world, and what shines through the way people search is that we are all part of these kind of distinct communities, and seeing it kind of like apply to my life kind of gave me the themes for the book. And also there are data points to support that. So searches for help are higher now than any time in history. People are more likely to search for jobs that help people than jobs that pay well, for instance. And there is a really it made me feel surprisingly optimistic. It says surprisingly hopeful. I think I'm probably a reasonably optimistic person, but definitely doing the work made me feel that things are kind of better in some ways than we think they are.
Yeah, I really like these notions of community, which maybe when you're sitting alone in front of your computer or your smartphone, you don't immediately notice, and querying to help others. But I think equally, and you also described that in the book, I think Google and having the search bar, it also changes accessibility, right? So you're mentioning daily mundane questions, but also giving access to people when there's a global pandemic.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, definitely. I talk a lot about COVID in the book because it changed everything. obviously, as we all know, for our lives, but it changed a lot in search as well. And it's one of these things that kind of comes back a lot in the book. So you could see how we did. There were lots of ways it changed. Even in the grief chapter, I talk about how it changed how we search for grief. And it had a measurable effect on that, which still persists today, actually. It changed how people shop. Like we looked at the things that people were spiking in search in terms of shopping products during COVID. Things like you would expect, like toilet paper, fair enough. But also things like tequila and wine LPs, things like that, which spiked and then they stayed high afterwards. So that you can see, the fact that you can see these kind of social changes through search data was really interesting to me, and seeing it kind of laid out like that. And COVID applies to lots of things like, and one of the other things that came through in the COVID data was the kind of the way those searches evolved. So the searches at first were around kind of what searches, like what is COVID? What are the symptoms? And they switched to how searches, which are much more action-led. They're how do I make a face mask? How do I make hand sanitizer? How do I protect my family? And I think that those patterns, actually, you see those around a lot of crises, where essentially the first things that people wanted to understand what's going on. And the second wave of searches are often around basically wanting to do something or to take action, not feel powerless.
One of my favorites from the book is that 15% of all Google searches each day are new. So was there maybe an insight that really surprised or maybe even shocked you?
I mean, doing this for like 11 years, not much surprises me at this point. There are some things which are just like, I thought were interesting. I've got a chapter on pets, a lot which is based around our puppy. But there is, one of the things I looked at was people searching for, can I keep something as a pet? And I thought, well, and it'll be different in different countries, right? And people actually in the UK do ask, can I keep a fox as a pet? And there's the one that really sort of was, can I keep a panda as a pet? I'm here to tell you can't keep a panda as a pet. But the fact people ask, I guess it's like, we're incredibly curious. There are more searches now than there were ever. And the fact that things are new every day, and you always think you've seen that all the formulations that things take, but they're always changing. Even with AI, is obviously bringing in more of those kind of changes.
And you've already talked a bit about the temporal development and spikes. So moving from what to how questions. I was also wondering about cultural and geographical differences. So another insight is that, for instance, the top searches around love are all outside of the EU and UK or US as well. What are your favorite insights regarding?
I mean, it's very one thing about data is there is a rhythm to the way people search. People tend to search for the same kinds of things around the same times. It could be during the day, for instance, around 2 a.m, there's a spike in searches for the word baby and sleep. And searches at night tend to be pretty metaphysical, like people worrying about what they're doing with their lives. And you see a lot of those kind of searches. And then during the year, there's a kind of rhythm to it as well. So in December, people search for how to play the piano before Christmas. And right now, it's graduation season. The US all searches around graduation. A month ago, it was prom. This is very American, but actually not entirely American now. And the month before that was promposals. Do we know what a promposal is? It's a real thing. When I was a kid growing up here, we did not have prom or promposals, but now it's like a global thing. So you can see these kind of the way those searches would maybe start in one place and then move across the world. And the other thing about the data is it's not really a data set in that it's never static, not for 1 millisecond. Like if you think about the people are constantly searching, so the data is always shifting. And what that means is you get often these kind of like ghosts in the machine, all these data points which just emerge and then vanish. So there was one that I dove into a little bit in the book, which was I was looking for the ways that people search for how to say thank you. So I thought it was interesting because globally people search for how to say thank you. And so mostly it's about saying thank you in another language. But there was one spike which was just so weird, and it was totally ephemeral and probably quite small, but big enough to notice, which was a spike in searches for how to say thank you for an unexpected gift, which I love that search anyway. And it was spiking in like Niger. And I don't know anything about Niger. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I didn't know where to, like, why would that be? And I contacted the Nigerian embassy in the US, and they didn't respond. Like, why should they? I contacted the US consulate in Niger, they didn't respond. And I found, in the end, I thought, I'm going to try and find somebody who's from Niger who might be able to tell me. And I found a NASA hydrologist called Dr. Faji Miner, who's amazing, had an incredible career. And so I wrote a note, so I'm really sorry, this is not about hydrology, but do you know why I might be seeing this spike? And she came straight back to me with basically this whole, just basically taught me about Nigerian culture, which is that you always should turn up with a gift. You don't, like, wherever you are, even if you don't have anything, you would turn up at somebody's house with a gift. So seeing this little, like, very ephemeral trend showing up, which then teaches me something about a culture I don't know anything about, was really fascinating to me. And a lot of the data does that geographically, like, you know, Liverpool FC are more searched in Kisangati than in, which is, I think, Uganda, than like they are in Liverpool. So like this kind of like variations geographically are really interesting.
And it's very interesting to hear also the process of the book. So very abductively or iteratively. So you're not just looking at the trend data, but it seems like you're going out in the field, trying to understand the underlying reasons. So I'd like to also talk a bit about the process of the book. So you've talked about how it started, but yeah, maybe you can also explain, you know, how does it differ from your day-to-day work at Google, and how did you come to curate the topics and themes for this book?
Yeah, I think like a lot of the trends, so I work on Google Trends, I always have, and because my background's in journalism, I work on anything that's like public facing. So for instance, at the end of the year, there's a big project called Year in Search, it's kind of round up to what people are searching. My team would do that. And so a lot of the things that we do day to day are kind of finding like weird and wonderful trends about things that are in the news from the moment. And yeah, that's always really interesting because how people are searching for a big event is fascinating. But what I wanted to get at was this idea that search kind of reflects our everyday lives and the things that we all do. And I haven't seen anything really on that. And so that was why I kind of decided to focus on that. And so Google Trends is a public data set. It's probably the world's biggest publicly available data set. It's free to use. It's trends.google.com. And so you go on there. Basically, most of the stuff in the book is from that public data set or stuff that we'd surfaced in other ways, just because partly because I knew that people would test me, but also because I just wanted it to be kind of accessible, but also to see, because I hadn't seen anybody who'd done that kind of analysis. And, you know, I'm not a statistician really by background at all. So for me, it was just seeing, you know, picking these everyday kind of moments for us and seeing also, there's a lot more of me in the book than I would have been comfortable doing originally. I'm being English, I don't like talking about myself. And a lot of the stuff is about like my family, or I talk about my mom, or talking about like different aspects of my life, and seeing that reflected in the data was just kind of was unusually emotional for me actually to write.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then how did that play along, let's say, with your team? And as you mentioned, some of the analysis are also quite complex in that you analyze them for semantic balance, looking at positive, negativity, neutralness of the.
I mean, I avoid sentiment analysis. Part of the reason is because I feel like it's BS. And there are loads of people, maybe there are people here who are going to say it's not BS, it's very important that. But because it's guessing, and when I was at Twitter, we did do sentiment analysis, and I kind of, for me, it would be like, you know, are you talking about bad in the kind of like bad or in the Michael Jackson sense? You know, it's like, I don't know. So it's never really worked with me for trends, because I think it's like if you look at searches for a politician, they don't automatically mean because somebody's searching for somebody, they're going to get elected. Because somebody searches for Donald Trump, it doesn't mean that they're supporters. And that applies for a lot of search. So that work is really complicated. And I think a lot of the most complicated stuff with trends goes on the back end. So this is for anybody who really cares about the data side of it. But essentially, Google Trends isn't like raw searches or anything like that. What it is sampleable searches, probably about a fifth. And they are firstly, the only stuff that makes it into the data set is stuff where there's a reasonable amount of searching. There are thresholds, so you'd never be able to identify like an individual search, say. And there's also what they call differential privacy, which basically what it means, it introduces noise when queries are at a very low level. So the idea is it's great for picking up bigger themes, but not necessarily for finding really tiny things. And it's also aggregated. So basically, when you search for something, Google tries to work out what you're really searching for. Are you searching for, Lincoln the president, Lincoln the town in Britain, Lincoln the movie, Lincoln the car? Those are all different topics in search, which they call entities on the back end. And so everything is kind of categorized into these entities, and then it's all normalized by geography, essentially for the geography of where you're pulling the analysis from. So it's really useful for comparing, say, London to Banbury or somewhere tiny. You can actually directly compare big place and small place, and that makes it frustrating to work with if you're used to like data sets where you know everything about somebody. Like I don't know what the demographics are of somebody, so all we have really is time and location, and location by city. That's as low as it gets. So, but it does give you kind of these amazing stories that you can tell around people collectively, and that's what I was interested in looking at.
And shifting topic a bit, but not completely, and I'm biased or selfish in that sense because of my own research in the field of human-computer interaction and AI, and of course a big topic nowadays. Also, how does AI replace search nowadays? And I think you sit at the forefront at that, also looking at, how this is implemented at Google. So where do you see this trend going, both globally, but also impacting your work?
Yeah, I mean, so we have over 2 decades of Google Trends search data, and we have a year of AI mode data. So Google AI mode, for anybody who knows, it's within search now. So if you search something, it allows you to do a kind of AI exploration. And we just published a report about AI search data this week. And essentially what's shifting, and there's a lot shifting, but the biggest things are really that searches are getting a lot longer. Searches are 3 times longer now than they used to be, queries, I mean. So people, instead of saying, find a restaurant near me, you might say, find a restaurant near me that's open till midnight, where I can take a group of 10 people and my own cake. So you can go these very kind of complicated routes. It's much more conversational as well. So there's a back and forth. I think conversational queries are growing by like 40% a month or something. It's much more multimodal, and so this is very Google jargon, but basically what it means is people are searching in different ways. So they're not just like on a phone or laptop, but they might be talking as a device or searching with images. It's really common now in a way that it just wasn't before. And I think it's like 1 in 6 searches are now multimodal, which is a big shift.
Yeah.
And there's it's very specific. Search queries are getting much more specific now. So for instance, people will search, they see a movie or a film. I've been in America too long. They see a film and see a car in the film, and they want to know what car that is. Or they hear a track and they want to know what instrument is playing on that track. Very, very specific. And there's also kind of like a bit of a cognitive offloading, by which I mean that we've all gone down these kind of rabbit holes of search. And with AI search, it's like you will get the AI to plan stuff for you. Some of these high stakes things, like financial planning or planning an event or those kind of planning queries are getting increasingly common too.
I think regarding...
I would say, sorry.
Yes.
I'm not getting a sense of changing what we search for. I think we still search for the same things. We still search for, help with our kids or planning a meal, whatever it is, but the way that we're doing it is what's changing.
And I mean, touching upon the last point, moving maybe away a bit from discovery, where you go to the 6 Google search phase towards a very condensed summary or synthesis. How do you see? Do you also look at the output that is provided to them, or at the follow-up questions?
So what we have is, and I've deliberately, this book is it's not really about Google. It's not really about tech. It's really about the way that we use it. If that makes sense. So all I look at is the questions people ask. And actually, within that data set, all you have really are the initial search and then related searches. So if somebody searches for, I don't know, a particular TV show, and then they search for yoga, you would know those two things. But we don't know, like you can't track people's searches long term. It's just not in the data. So really what I decided to do is just focus on what we ask Google, but what we ask search, and then what that perhaps says about us.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's interesting, or what you share a lot about the book, is that search is also a means to help or to get help or to think about how to help others, which is often like also how we imagine AI as an AI companion. So it's interesting to hear that people are asking similar questions in that sense. Do you also see a shift in like the move from one to the other, or like
helping others? I mean, I think like both of them have increased a lot. A lot of search queries, when you talk about help is growing. It's like more people searching for help than ever before, but it is it's about other people, and the top things people want to help with is helping somebody with depression or helping somebody with anxiety, and that kind of makes sense because anxiety is growing a lot, and it's seen as the sort of thing that a lot of people don't necessarily understand fully, and so they need help to understand that. It's also around like whenever there's an event in the world, people search to donate. So that's like an immediate thing. Search to donate blood. When there's like a shooting or something, you really see there's like a direct spikes around those moments where basically something happens, and again, perhaps we feel powerless, and the instinct is to want to do something about it. And again, this is like, I didn't actually go into it thinking that was going to be the case. I thought we perhaps proved to be more selfish than that, but that's not what came through in the data at all.
That's nice, encouraging to hear. And I guess a lot of these events, also inquiries, are we touched upon it briefly beforehand, but highly contextual, culturally related. So how do you deal with those? And also maybe you can share a bit how in your day-to-day work, the team you're working with do you have to make sure you have an array of cultural language activities?
No, it's really true actually, because often, I mean, my biggest gap is that, any Gen Z queries are just going to go like this with me. Even things like there's a chapter on language in the book and a lot of slang. I had no idea what the words were, or the acronyms that people search for, and so that it's actually an issue for us. I think like we try and have a team with a variety of kind of backgrounds and experience. Most of the people that I work with, it's a real mix actually, like, because Google has tons of analysts, but what we found is that analysts are not always so good at providing like the insights that people need, or like understanding what a story is, or how like this is an interesting kind of way to take this data. And then so what we try and do is, like, often some of the team have got data journalism background, so it means that they understand like storytelling, but they also understand data. They're not scared by a spreadsheet. And so we have got a couple of people analysts who kind of move that way, and they're amazing. So it's like kind of trying to combine all those skill sets together, so that, and people, what you find is over time, people on the team develop like specialisms or things they're good at. Like one of the teams really into fashion, so they are the expert like at like the latest color or whatever it is big in fashion at the moment.
And we've briefly talked about it earlier. So I think also aligned with your findings, a lot of the insights that are shared, or like the value of these insights being shared, it's very community or society facing, with researchers like me being able to access also Google Trends via the API, also synthesizing these trends for the wider public. Are you also using these insights at Google itself? Are you distributing or sharing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, like, there are other data sets at Google. I think Trends is the best one, but not just because, like, emotionally, but it just, like, objectively is the amount of work that goes in at the back end to categorize stuff. It's the fact that it's real time. You can see data from like 2 minutes ago. How many data sets can you do that? Back to 2004. So you can see the real time reaction to to something. So often, like, we work with like tons of different teams. There are teams that, like marketing people or the sports team, for instance. We have on our team, we have a sports fanalist, and her whole thing is she's a massive sports fan, really good with data. So her whole thing is looking at how fans search around their teams and so on. And then we'll work with organisations like NGOs. So, for instance, we work with the UN around like refugee crisis, things like Ukraine or the Afghanistan withdrawal. When these big things happen, people often will ask for trends data because you can see how people in like war zones, what they're asking for. We help with the UN around Middle East and around Gaza as well, like so they can try and use the data as a variable when they're thinking about the information that people need to get and where it is. So it's like but I would say it's such a new data set in like statistical terms because it's only been around. You've got data back to 2004. It existed a couple of years before that. It's like that's brand new, and so I've said this in the book. But it's like being a kind of archaeologist in real time. You're finding things out, or finding ways to use the data, and it's not like I've been asked before. Is it like polling? And it's like it complements polling. It's not the same. Polling's how 200 years old or however old it is, so they've had a lot of time to think about how you weight things and that sort of thing. And right now we just have the data as it is, and so there might be ways that somebody in this room who uses trends data in a brand new way that we haven't thought about, and that's what kind of makes it interesting to me.
And you also earlier talked about this fluidity of the data set.
Yeah.
How did you deal with this for the book?
Yeah, it's really messy, and like if you do read the book, you'll see it all over. I'm saying by the time you read this might have changed because basically the data just constantly shifts, constantly evolves and moves because it is a sample. It's a sample of a fifth of searches, how many billions of searches there are. So, and it's not like, the engineers call it an insights engine. They don't even call it a data set because they don't like doing engineers have very precise. Because it is just this weird shifting thing, and it's like, when I explain it to people, I say it's so big, it's ubiquitous, except for places where they don't have Googles, like China, say. But it's also so immediate. So it is like essentially, it's like both qualitative and quantitative data. And really, what it is qualitative data in quantitative quantities. Essentially, think about trying to say that fast. But it's basically so big. So we had to. So often, what I'll do is that's why with the book, particularly, I would focus on a specific area to try and narrow it down, and then see what the data would tell me.
And looking at your career now, looking back, it seems like you were made for this role, right? Your work at The Guardian, but it was a brand new role, right? You were Twitter's very first data editor, and now at Google. How did this come about? So, and how come that you're so intrigued by these maybe different and new types of data?
I mean, I guess like I've always been interested in understanding how things work. Like when I was a kid, I used to take things apart, and try and put clocks back together again. It's a disaster. But I was, for me, when I was at school, like maths felt to be this abstract thing that had no relation in my life. But what I came to realise, somehow I had this thing that in the newsroom, journalism is full of people that do not like data or numbers, and are perhaps doing it so they don't have to deal with maths. And so being in the newsroom and then seeing, well, actually, this could really add to that story with this data was really like somehow I kind of fell into that. So I got lucky, I guess. And then, when I was at The Guardian, we set up this thing called the Data Blog, which was the first news organization blog about data. And originally, the reason we set it up was because there was tons of data there and being published. It was around the time of kind of the global open data revolution. But it was often available, as PDFs, which is the worst way, terrible way to publish data. And so the whole point of blog initially was just to make data available. We published stuff on Google Sheets. That was it, really. And then what we started to do was we started to work on stories like where it would end up in the paper, or it would be exactly what a journalist needs to tell a story. And then we started working in visual storytelling as well. So I guess my role's kind of emerged, but what I'm really interested in is making data accessible and open. And yeah, that's what I love about Trends. It's publicly accessible and open, and that to me is really important because this belongs to us. This is our data, really. You know, if you search, this is our data, right? And I think it's good that it's available, and it should be.
Yeah. And if there would be no technical limitations, no contextual challenges, what would be your dream to do next with the Google Trends data?
Oh my goodness!
Or would you say that's all in the book already?
I think, like, for me, I think the next thing is there a way we can get AI data into Google Trends at all so people can see and then really start to understand how people are using AI, because people are using it, and so it's good to understand that. And I think right now it's not there, but that's one thing we're actually working on that at the moment. So obviously with Trends, we know that it's anonymous, it's like it's accessible, it's categorized. If there's a way that we can do that with AI searches, I think that would be amazing, because then we start to understand what it says about us and so on. I think that, and just making the data helpful for people. I love when like an organization uses Trends data in the way that, say, the UN did, and then they actually do something useful, so something useful comes out of it. That kind of impacts what I like to do. But
and last question for me before we open the floor. What's a theme or a query or finding from the book you'd love to see more, and vice versa? What's maybe a theme or query that's not in the book you'd like to see in the Trends data?
I started, one of the trends I have right at the beginning of the book is about, so during hurricanes in the US, you always see a spike in queries for how to calm a dog in the storm. I love that query, partly because it says a lot. Like, this is, people are in a terrible danger. They need to be looking after their families, and that's the thing that people search for. And that to me is incredibly human. And I think we don't look enough at like what those kind of human searches reveal about us. And I think like so I'd like to be able to explore that more. I'd like to get more at like a lot of the search queries that we do are kind of they are about things that perhaps we feel we should know. So how to boil an egg is like the top food search. It's always the top food search, which suggests that not only is it like something that people struggle with, but they struggle with it repeatedly. So there's a lot of things like that, but some of them are really kind of poignant, like how do I know somebody likes me, or how to get a girl, how to get a boy to like you. And I think like in the past, like when we were growing up, we had agony aunts, to ask questions to, and maybe there are some things that we feel like embarrassed about, and I guess that's the biggest difference between social media data and search data, is that with social media you're performing, right? You're presenting yourself in a certain way, but search is honest in that way. It's something, but the fact that we're all doing these things is kind of reassuring. But it's also something I'd like to explore more.
Thank you. I've taken up enough room, but I see a lot of people in the audience, and maybe there are some questions. I think there's a microphone, but if not, maybe we can start in the first row, and then I see 2 hands in the 4th row. I think there's a microphone. Thank you.
Yes, I'm involved with European Union on data space, that at the end is data science. And the question I'm trying to better understanding, in order to give value to the data, you need to have a complete ecosystem, such as data, AI you mentioned, or any other things, infrastructure, as well as, let's say, the user at the same time. So then doesn't make sense of value of data. Now, how do you consider this approach, this ecosystem in the data science, let's say, framework?
Wow. Okay. So if I get the question right, so basically the kind of the ecosystem of data, you mean as essentially like where it comes from in terms of the person, like how it's processed, like the tools, I guess, like so Google's like influence, would be the analogy there, I guess. And then what was the third?
Democratize the people, the user.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like, yeah, that is the biggest statistical question I feel I can answer properly. But I would say like, for me, what I love about this particular data set is it is all centered around the users because it's their first point. This is also why I don't deal with what happens after. You know, where do these searches go? And there is probably that part of the ecosystem is missing from this analysis for sure. I think it's interesting, but it probably says more about like whichever platform you use, like it says more about Google, say, than or the technology or the way the technology is always changing. Like when I wrote this book, I delivered it a year ago because it takes a year to publish a book, apparently, who knew? And I kept having to write stuff and add bits into it because the tools were changing all the time. You know, a year ago, AI mode was launched, and now we have there's a billion users. So it's really hard with, I think like the frameworks that you work in are probably on data sets that are more static, right? They're not shifting in the space. So I'd be interested to know, like, for you, like how with a data set that's constantly changing like this, like what kind of ecosystem framework would you use for that? Yeah.
We will have a reception afterwards, so I'm sure there will be some more. Yes, please.
Hi, Simon.
Hi.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us. I'm Ashish from India. My question is goes with the title, what we ask Google has become what we ask Gemini. Now, you guys mentioned earlier that the search has become lengthier. Now, I have two parts to my question. First one is, has it also become personal? Google benefiting because of that?
So I'm sorry that the acoustics are terrible. So are the searches becoming more personal? Was that a question? And then does Google benefit from that?
That's right. That's right.
I mean, like, I'm not a business person, so I can't tell you like the business model of Google and stuff. I think like searches are becoming personal. It's just a fact. They really are. And I think I talk about them in the book. How do you know if somebody likes you is an incredibly personal search. I think in what you see with AI is that an AI mode certainly you see that searches are people might ask, help me write a poem to somebody that I care about. Things like that. That's the new thing that I don't think you'd have asked before. But again, it's really early. We've only got a year's worth of data, and that's just in the US and the UK, and perhaps in India, I think, as well, but not everywhere. So it's not comparable yet as to the bigger data set. But I think, I would say like searches are personal, but there's a sweetness to that I see in it as well that I was really fascinated by.
Thank you.
I think there was a question, right next.
Hi, I'm Estelle. I also work at Google, but in the SF office. I'm just wondering, I heard like a pretty hot take on how you were saying that sentiment data is not that useful.
I apologize to everybody who's worked with sentiment data.
No, I think that was an interesting take because for the last presidential elections, you probably know that poly markets predicted pretty well that Trump was going to win the elections. So I'm just wondering whether you wanted to elaborate a bit more on that take, and also kind of generally wondering how else is big data useful? Because for the past few years, I've been like thinking about big data as well. And through looking at data coming from X and also Google search, I think a lot of what I'm getting, which I think is useful, is actually sentiment and like where people are leaning towards. So I'm just curious, what other ways do you think these data can be interpreted, and whether you want to refine your statement on that?
Yeah, I think like, okay, so I should point out that like, this is from my experience, but I do think, there's a lot of kind of sentiment you can glean from the phrasing of queries, but I think just the fact that somebody's searching for one particular person, I don't think that tells you that much actually, because it might be they've never heard. It could be a new candidate, they don't know about them. There's a new thing going on. But I think like there is stuff you can do, but I've not seen really good research around this yet, where for instance, like looking at in the US, like people in elections, people put up yard signs, right, for the candidate. So maybe yard signs for one candidate versus yard signs for another candidate. That's interesting. We did a project with the Cook Report in the US, which everybody knows they're a big kind of polling organization, and what they were more interested in actually were the long-term shifts around issues. And actually those are really interesting, like, how, an issue rises and falls over time. So in the book, I talk about how, and this is actually more sentiment analysis, so maybe I'm refining this a bit, is, so for instance, we did a project with the Washington Post around searches around same-sex marriage. And in 2004, a lot of those searches in a lot of states were pretty negative, pretty anti. It's like against how to stop same-sex marriage, stuff like that. And they evolved over time to become more informational, like, where do I get married? How many states, at that point before law changed, allowed same-sex marriage, stuff like that. So you can, I think, like, weirdly, I think some kind of linguistic speciality, so understanding linguistics and trends data could be a really useful combination there. And that would get at some of those sentiments. So I'm sorry, I think like with something like sentiment analysis, my experience of it was just like tools that give sentiment scores to stuff. I have not yet seen a successful version of that in trends. And I do think there is a lot of potential for looking at the phrasing, and especially with AI searches becoming more complicated and more detailed, that might provide some more opportunities there. But I don't like dashboards either, so there's data things that I would change, but
Yeah, thank you. That's fair. Thank you.
Question in the back and the left.
Hi there, I'll stand so you can see me. I was wondering if there had been any impact in Google searches as a result of changes in social media. So when Instagram was introduced, or TikTok or Reels, does that change what people search for?
I mean, if something trends on TikTok, you see it in search straight away. And I don't know whether it's parents trying to understand what their kids are saying. Like 6, 7, when that was a thing, that was like, you could really see that emerge. And same with like language and slang. There might be phrases which come up because of social media. Absolutely. Like last year, it was this weird phrase I don't really understand. I'm looking to my niece to ask her. Skibbity toilet. It was a big thing. I'm just laughing. Okay, but I'm a figure of fun. But basically, those kind of phrases which come up, which only really emerge because of social media. Absolutely. And that is because to be fair, I think it's because they permeate society as a whole, and then the search data reflects society. So I think of it working that way. But yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and the other thing is, you often get, they only last for a second. They last for a day, and then they vanish, those trends.
I have a quick follow-up question because you mentioned with the semantic analysis, but also equally earlier you mentioned that how we ask question changes, and also it's becoming more conversational. Do you also see anything in terms of homogenization of questions? Because I was like positively surprised by that people still can come up with new questions.
I mean, I think actually the fact that queries getting longer perhaps means there's going to be, if we looked at that figure again, it could be bigger because queries are going to be different. But people ask questions in different ways, even different languages. So for instance, like the question format, who, what, when, where, how, works great in English. It works quite well in some languages. Doesn't work well in Japanese, for instance. So like we see searches in different languages in different ways. Or even like the way that people would formulate questions and put a question mark at the end of it. Or and I would think that there's more of that now as we get more conversation.
Thanks so much. I'm wondering what trends or struggles you're seeing people face the most when it comes to human connection and relationships.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So, search around loneliness, how not to be lonely is a trend in the book, and why am I so lonely? But you see that in search. There's also a lot of questions around friendships, because people, and there's almost as much in the way of searches around friendships there are around searches around love. And so you see, like, what is a true friend? Like, how to know if my friend's a true friend? Like this idea that that there is a true friendship, and that how do you know what that is? It's really interesting. So there's almost like how to know if queries seem to kind of get at that a little bit. But I think this idea of loneliness and then feeling connection, but it's where I talk a little bit in the book about the collective unconsciousness, this idea that there are these communities out there that we don't know we're part of, and that really comes through in the data. You're probably, it's like, my family's history feels really wind specific to me. It's full of lots of variables that, but what I've realised is that the thing that's wind specific about it is the collection of those variables, and that's what makes it interesting. But yeah, it's a big, people are looking for connection for sure, and you see that in the data.
There's one question in the front. Yeah, if you could pass on. Yeah, and then one in the back.
That's right. You've highlighted some of the nice positive findings from the search. And I'm only a third of the way through the book yet, so maybe it's towards the end. But I'm wondering whether there's stuff that you left out of the book because it's the darker side of searching and you couldn't write it.
I mean, I would say I've been asked. This is not the first time I've been asked that question, because everybody assumes that's all it is. And I would say, like, you want to look for stuff that's darker. You can absolutely find it, but it's more of the exception. Those kind of searches that you see on the news because there's a news story about whatever crime or something that's been committed, and there'll be a search. They were searching for this or that. That stuff is not commonly searched. I mean, I would think about, like, if you look about what people do most of the time, the biggest searches are things like what's the weather, what's the movie, what can I make for dinner tonight. These big everyday things. And and in the book I talk about how, for instance, like, there is a spike in search and grief in Sandy Hook every year on the anniversary of the school shooting. There's a spike in searches for bulletproof backpacks around the last school shooting. So I do kind of touch upon those things when they're big enough to show up. But honestly, most of search is pretty. I mean, somebody asked me the other day if it's mundane. I don't think it's mundane because I think it reflects who we are. But it's daily. It's normal. It's like, when was the last time you looked for something horrible? It's like and for it to show up in trends, it has to be enough to really be kind of common. So I looked at the rule rather than the exception in that case.
My question is that do men and women search for the same things? And if not, can you give some examples? Thank you.
Do men and women search for the same thing? So we don't have demographics in the data, so I can't tell you. I can tell you that around Valentine's Day, gifts for boyfriend is higher search than gifts for girlfriend. But that's obviously that doesn't tell you anything. So I would say, unfortunately we don't have the demographics, but I think, like, this is in what you were asking earlier about semantics. There is a way maybe you can look at language, but I think the fluidity of the world is reflected in the fluidity of the data. So.
Hi, thank you. When I first heard about Google Trends, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, not sure. I remember that they were able to correlate what people are searching on Google with the epicenter of the spread of the flu disease in some countries.
Oh, flu trends, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard about that, and I was just wondering, and I think Google was publishing and being very proud about this correlation that they found. And I was just wondering if after that, or just recently, you did mention about some of the insights that you get from the searches, if there are any new ones that Google is proud of or is publishing.
So flu trends was an API that existed before my time, but it was like a first attempt to see if you could predict health conditions essentially with search data. And that was kind of superseded basically by a trends API, which is a public API, which anybody can access. You've got to apply for it. A lot of academics do use it. And during COVID, there was the Google Health team started publishing like specific queries every week so people could see them share. I mean, I think it's really interesting. And so Google Trends comes from the work of Hal Varian, who used to be Google's chief economist. And he was basically the person who built trends data. And the reason he did it was because he'd seen these patterns that emerged around different kind of economic factors. So there's this idea of the trends as a database of intentions. You start searching for something way before it happens or before it happens. And so, for instance, searches for unemployment benefits spike before the unemployment figures register a spike. So you can see, and you can see during COVID searches for food banks, for instance, started spiking before people picked up that people were severely challenged, in being able to access food. So, and I think the same thing, those same rules apply to health. So there is a lot of researchers have started trying to use trends in that way. But again, it's like another area where, we're right at the beginning of what that data can mean. But it kind of makes sense. People start searching for a symptom and then it happens. So.
I think there were two more questions, one in the front and one further. Oh, okay. Yes.
Thank you for that lovely talk. Simon, I have a question for you, and then I have a question for you as well, Anuschka. The first question is, as our human behavior with AI changes, how is the search data itself going to get polluted from a human versus AI search perspective? And are we going to be able to separate trends that are truly human versus influenced or polluted by AI? And I'll come back to my second question.
No, so basically that is like an active thing that the trends, like the engineering team are like filter trends for at the moment. Because basically it's spam, essentially, when if search gets pinged by an API so essentially there was a ton of spam text. It's constantly evolving. We've got asked about this in the past around people trying to game trends. Can you game trends to show that your thing is trending? It's incredibly hard to do. But to do it, you would have to do activity that would be detectable. Does that make sense? So at that point, so right now it's like an evolving thing, but it's something that the team is super aware of. We talk about like all the time.
Thank you. And a question for you. As a parent of a young person about to go into university, what should we be thinking about the discipline of data science in the age of AI? Is it relevant, not relevant, changing, evolving in a certain way? What's the important thing to know?
Yeah, I think it's probably more important than ever, and understanding data. And I say that independent of, you should learn that language, you should have exactly these hard skills. But I think, the world is centered, or there's more and more data to analyze and this has also a performative effect. So we not only have more data, but then vice versa, the world is also designed around collecting data, measuring data, performing for data. So I think this is becoming important, and I would probably recommend going for an interdisciplinary route because it's omnipresent everywhere. So if you're working for an insurance company, you will probably have to ask how you're tracking your patient or your client's data. Is that ethically? I can think of any domain where this is relevant, or examples from the UN where data can inform decisions and policies. So in today's world, also seeing AI and having this on the tip of our fingers, I cannot see a world or a domain, a context where data is not important. So even if you're not predominantly interested in data, but in a different domain, I think it's still important to know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'd agree with that.
And if you're still fit for two more questions on the left side. And if you had your hand up beforehand, I'm sorry, be persistent. And
thank you for a great talk. Simon, who competes with Google search? Is there a competition, or is it like a one?
I'm sorry.
Who competes with Google search? Is there somebody else like Bing or Microsoft in the search space besides the AI, which is cannibalizing probably part of your space? But is there competition within the search engine?
Is there competition for
Google? Within the search engine? Yeah.
I mean,
is it Bing or is it
it's not my area of expertise. I would just say that right now this is the world's biggest data set. So for me, it's the one to work in. But.
And in terms of AI, do we think that is it going to completely take over the search engine space? Do you think as we go on, as we progress?
I mean, there was Google I/O was last week, and so they announced there about how they want, AI is already becoming a key part of search for people. I mean, right now I would say my experience is that I use both. I'll use standard search for some things and AI for other things where I need slightly more complex view, but that's just me. But yeah, it's part of our lives, and definitely I'm not it's not whether it's good or bad, it's just there, and I want to be able to use it and analyze it that way.
Two more questions, and yeah.
So a little bit of a tangential question, but I think it might lead on from the previous one about. So this is about what we ask Google, and massive data sets giving you an opportunity to share some of the insights as a kind of byproduct, I suppose, of what the search is primarily for, which is to help us search stuff. I was wondering whether there's any way in the future which it might be the way around. So Google's reach and penetration could be used as a survey. So switch it around, Google ask us.
There is there used to be, I know this still exists, there used to be this tool called Google Surveys, where you could basically, and I think Nate Silver wrote a thing about it, about how they're actually quite useful for a bit. But no, I mean, it's got, the reach is such, you could reach people in ways that, would be difficult to do otherwise. So I know this guy, this is it's cheating really, but
There was the last question in the back.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, Simon. That was lovely. My question is about.
Can you speak up a bit?
Yes,
Sorry.
okay.
Thank you.
Recent years. I'm curious to know if people's searches about themselves, their identity, and their perspectives on themselves has changed or shifted in recent years. Who am I? Who am I supposed to be? What am I? Yes, I'm very curious about that, particularly with just the noise that we have in society today and just so much going on. I feel that a lot of people are still trying to understand who they are and where they are in this world. So I'm curious if that is showing up in searches.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So a lot of the book is about that really, about who we are. And I think you definitely see, I mean, weirdly, one of the top searches is "Where am I?" as well. but you do see this, and I think often the questions there's this. A lot of questions are about are we doing the right thing? Which says something. So it's almost like we feel there's we help sometimes. We want to do the right thing necessarily in seeing it showing up. But the questions about identity, I'd say, have probably shifted and evolved over time for sure. And there's I think that would actually be a really interesting area to dive more into. But the book is about a lot of that kind of personal world for sure. But really interesting, and I think there's an endless amount of research you could do about that.
Thank you so much, Simon, for taking the time and visiting LSE. It's been a real pleasure not only reading the book, but also meeting you in person. And I can recommend for anyone interested in data, but also just learning more about people's minds and what questions are keeping them up at night. It's very interesting to read. We will have a reception with drinks where Simon will also be present and also sign books. So thank you again also as an audience for coming out here in the heat, and thank you again, Simon.